My name is Leyton Schnellert, and along with my dear friend of, wow, more than 2 decades, Tammy Renyard, we are your co-hosts for this series once again. This is the 6th year of engaging all learners in the middle years, and this is a webinar series that is co-sponsored or co-hosted by the Edith Landau Virtual Learning Center at UBC, the BC Rural Education Advisory, with support from the province of British Columbia and the Ministry of Education and Childcare. We're just so glad to all be here together, creating good energy and building our pedagogy from wherever it's at, which is good, to even better, because we're taking this growth collaborative energy opportunity. Just call ourselves a collective. Today's session, we're thrilled to feature Dr. Shelley Moore, future Dr. Belinda Chi, and future Dr. MJ Medenwaldt, should she take up the call. And tonight we're really focusing on inclusion with kind of a literacy angle or a humanities angle. But we have our next sessions we'll talk about at the end. Next one is December 3rd, then February 20th, and April 29th. Tammy, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Ait squale CM CA. Good day, my respected friends. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm zooming from the traditional territory of the Hulkaminam speaking people. I want to recognize the colonial impact that has changed historic governance, health and wellness, family dynamics, and traditional food and local nations in this area. These factors directly affect the Hakaksamen in our classrooms and schools every day. As part of my commitment to truth and reconciliation, I'm working to better understand the communities, language, and histories where I have the privilege to live, work, and learn. And I wanted to share this picture on the left. That's a picture from the top of Swatkas or Mount Prevost. And it's been shared that Swatkas is part of the creation story for this area. Swatkas was the name of the dog that the creator sent to Stutson as a companion. And Stutson was one of the first who fell from the sky. And you can see Mount Prevost in the bottom right. And that is somewhere that since I've moved back to the Cowichan Valley, I have been hiking and appreciating and reconnecting with land in a different way. And as I've learned alongside Leyton and others, the opportunity to view land as text has been such a gift for me. So we invite you to take a minute to acknowledge the territories where you're zooming from today in the chat, if you would like to do that. We know that we have folks coming to us from all over the place, and we're so grateful that you're here, and we're excited to share this next chunk of time with you.
Thank you, Tammy. Couldn't do without you. Why? Isquis Leyton. That's hi. My name's Leyton in Insilchin, which is the language of the Syilx. I'm so fortunate to join you from Syilx territory and the Tumhulauch and the Tamich, the land and the water, and how the language and the people and the place are interconnected. And so speaking the language, the local language, is a practice of respect and also building my understanding about the holistic approaches that we can have if we just embrace how we are in our places and the peoples of that place and the learnings and the knowledge of that place. I just am so grateful to be here. And as you're saying hi in the chat box, that's my attempt at French. My apologies, Chloe. I know Chloe McKenzie's on here, one of my fabulous fluent French speaking colleagues. But if we take the practice up of joining this community in the chat box and acknowledging where we are, we bring our places and ourselves and our commitments together, and we grow a little bit more in our connections by honoring and connecting to the people and the places of our places. But we bring those and we speak those or we write those into the chat box as a way to practice what we believe and to support each other in moving forward. Oh, I get a little emotional, everybody being together online. I don't get to see you all that often. And then you'll just notice that we have a version of what we now call British Columbia, but recognizing the peoples of what is now British Columbia, and that's also an act of decolonization. And if any of those rural groups out there haven't submitted a Growing Innovation in Rural Sites of Learning project, send me an email and I'll send you the proposal form. We're a community like this, supporting each other, making change from wherever we are. Okay, so I cannot believe I get to introduce Dr. Shelley Moore, who has been a learning thorn in my side for, wow, more than 30 years, Shelley. I got to teach Shelley in grade 8 and grade 9 in a lot of decades ago. And Shelley, I'm just so grateful that you have taken up the work in the ways that you have to really push our thinking forward in inclusion in ways I could not have even imagined at that time. And so thanks for coming to join us, or welcome back to the series.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all today. Welcome. All 87 of us are here today on this cold October fall day. I'm so happy to be back. Where do we begin? I was recently had the opportunity to present with Leyton in Prince George, and he did this thing. And, he says I'm a thorn in his side, but like, he also kind of provokes me quite a bit as well. And he kind of walked us on this journey about who he was as a part of the situating and honoring the places where he's been and connected to. And so I am kind of following his footsteps and have just kind of want to not just acknowledge. I love how you said that, Leyton, acknowledge not just where we are, but who we are and who we're with in these places. So I am joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Squamish First Nation, specifically Niklelaquam, which is also known today as Bowen Island. And I live here with my incredible family, my wife, Jessica, my two daughters, Meta and Eben, who are much older than this picture, but I also know that like I'm not going to be able to control their outfits forever, and so until then they will be sailors. But yes, I'm so fortunate to live here. The little guy on the bottom, this is Finley. He's now passed, but he was a perfect dog. Now we have Ruthie. She's not perfect, but gotta harness my inner Ruthie, because you know what? She is happy all the time. She doesn't care what I think about her. Sometimes I have to harness that. I am Danish. My family comes from Denmark, and so I've learned a lot about kind of what it means when I first went to Denmark and understood like the importance of representation and seeing yourself in the world. I'd never felt that before, and so really understanding what that means coming back to Canada and knowing that we want our kids to be able to see themselves around themselves. The center is my mom. She's so cute. Look at her. Her favorite colors are purple, pink, and blue. It's a very accurate picture. She's navigating cancer right now, so it's like intellectually, I understand that we may not always have our parents, but emotionally, like how's that possible that you may wake up one day without your mom? So we're kind of navigating that. Originally from Edmonton, my first cohort of students. And so like, I mean, I could spend hours talking about this slide. I'm not going to, but just a little bit about who I am and where I'm from and who I do this work for is on this screen right now. When I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I know last time we were together, I talked about backwards design, which was a really key inclusive curriculum strategy framework that I learned as a practitioner. And then as a researcher and kind of a coach supporting this work, there was another strategy that I learned about that, when people ask me, like, how do you do inclusion? Like, the more that I learn about this strategy, the more that I'm like, this is where inclusion lives. And what's interesting is, as a special educator, I wasn't really taught a lot about curriculum. I was, taught about accommodations, like how do we adapt and how do we modify, which is a really inefficient process because it relies on retrofitting. And so as I started to learn more about curriculum, which aligned with kind of the renewal of BC's curriculum, it's kind of led me down this journey of, I think this is where inclusion lives, is in the curricular design, the curriculum design and planning that we actually didn't learn a lot about as special educators. So I'm kind of really grateful for that learning. And so the strategy, and this, my friends, is my favorite strategy of all times, because this is where we can make this live, this work. And I know you've heard of them before, but they're called different things. But today I wanted to talk about learning continuums. Sometimes they're called learner progression. Sometimes they're called learner maps. They're called, the most recent that I heard was asset-based rubric. That's great. You can use that too. But what a continuum and the power of a continuum, really it's designed for a range of learners, and the reason why that's powerful is because education isn't designed for a range of learners. It's designed for a benchmark. It's designed for a group of homogeneous learners. Education has historically not been designed for diverse and equitable and inclusive classrooms. And so when I learned about learning continuums, I realized, hey, wait a second. This is one of the first strategies that I've really been able to get my hands on that is actually designed for diverse learners from the start, in a really clear way that works in any grade level, and any grade level curriculum. And so it's my favorite. So I'm going to kind of walk you through it. Now, the tricky thing about learning continuums is they're also very, very misunderstood, because we have this legacy of standardization that kind of leaks in sometimes when we don't even know it. So what a learner continuum is, and it kind of builds on the work of backwards design, because you have to know what the learning outcome is. You have to know what the learning standard is, in order to do many things. Connect to universal design for learning, connect to learning continuum. And so knowing that learning standard is based on that. But if you're gonna really kind of dig into a learning standard, a really key feature of that is to separate a learning standard from the task. And what that allows us to do is to create multiple pathways to that standard. And so for a learning continuum to be inclusive, we have to make sure that that learning standard and that continuum it's called task neutral, which means we're not assigning an activity to this. It can work for any activity. And that's really where you start to see universal design linking in. As a special educator, I was taught to have multiple entry points, but learning continuums kind of flips that on its head and kind of says, wait a second, how about instead of having different entry points, what if we have a shared entry point, and an entry point that's accessible for everybody, and kids can take it as far as they want. And what I like about that is that it's much easier to add on complexity than it is to take away. Because if you have to take complexity away, it's usually because someone hasn't been successful. And so when you start with accessibility, everyone can be successful, and then kids can just take it and they can run. And so we're kind of creating these kind of predicted pathways of where kids can go, but they really all originate from a common accessible starting point. And if it's accessible for everyone, then students can have some shared learning experiences together, which is a fundamental idea in that inclusive practice. Okay, but here's the part that's really important, is that for a very long time, I mean, it's all I know, is that teachers make these decisions. They're deciding the continuums, they're deciding the directions, they're deciding the destinations. But a part of, what we're learning about student agency and self-determination is, really asking questions around how do we bring students into this process, right? Where's their role in determining where they go and how they get there and what's their path? And so there's a really key part of design here, which is we're designing kind of opportunities, but there's also an element of how do we let go then and provide some space for students to start to make some of those decisions themselves, about where and how they're learning. Yes, it's so exciting. Here's the part where things get tricky, is that a continuum is not a rubric. If that's the only thing you take away from today, I'll be happy, okay? A continuum is not a rubric. Now, in defense of rubrics, they were originally kind of designed to be continuums, but then the internet got their hands on them and they've become completely contaminated. So let me show you what rubrics have become. And I apologize ahead of time because I'm going to completely change how you view rubrics, and you're going to see them everywhere and you're going to be like, okay, watch, you ready? This is what rubrics have become. We have these columns and there's a goal. And then we have a description of the goal or the task actually. And then the other columns are deficits of that description. Often those deficits are based on frequency. So really simply, ready? I can rhyme. I sometimes rhyme. I can't rhyme. I don't rhyme. Or my favorite, I can rhyme with support. Friends, those are not options. Having deficits of one description, those are not options. This is an illusion of choice. And so then I was like, okay, let me find a really good example of why rubrics need to go in the garbage. You ready? So I Googled good example of a rubric. I love the internet. Are you ready? This is what comes up. The scrumptious rubric reference. Okay. So I look at this and I'm like, this is perfect, because you know what kids do? They jump to the end. So let's just ignore the other one. So listen, ready? Right on. Because the goal here is to make a sandwich. So let's jump to the end. Your sandwich went beyond expectations. You threw in some extra flavor and tomatoes and surprised the customer with a side of chips. Okay. If the goal is to make a sandwich, this is why knowing the goal is really important. If the goal is to make a sandwich, why are there chips and pop even part of this conversation? That's like giving, let's like evaluating for neat printing and sparkles. No, off. This has nothing to do with sandwiches, okay? Second problem, I would never eat this sandwich. Like, what is that, a pickle? Never. I would never eat a sandwich with a pickle on it. So do I just like don't meet the goal? And you know what? I'm not alone. There's many people who would not eat this sandwich. So you know what I would do? I would pick the pickles off. I'd pick the tomatoes off. And you know what? It'd be really hard to wipe off that mayo. Because you know what my favorite sandwich is in the whole world? My favorite sandwich? Bologna and mustard on crustless Wonder Bread. It's like an ode to my poverty as a child, and one that I will like hold on to forever. It is still a sandwich, folks. It is a less complex sandwich than this disgusting Dagwood, but you know what? It still meets the goal. And this, my friends, is why rubrics are so problematic, because we assume that everyone is going to eat this super complex sandwich. And then you find out, oh, there's allergies. Oh, there's preferences. Oh, people don't have access to avocado in February. So they have to remove. It's a reductive measure as opposed to an additive measure. Now, if you look at the other columns, this is the other problem. They've just erased parts of the sandwich. Like, I have never seen a floating turkey sandwich like this before. It's never happened. So I'm like, this actually isn't even real. It's never real. And then you go to the first column, barely hanging on. The customer wants a refund. Bread alone is not a sandwich. And you know, I actually don't disagree. It's true. Bread alone is not a sandwich. But you know, if you think about it in a different way, the only thing that all four of these columns have in common is the bread. So rather than thinking bread alone is not a sandwich, what if we thought bread is essential to a sandwich? Because if you don't have the bread, you also don't have a sandwich, you have a salad, okay? So this is very often what happens with rubrics. It's they become a reductive measure as opposed to an additive. And here's the fascinating thing. Do you know what the #1 brick and mortar fast food chain is in the world with the number of brick and mortar restaurants? Do you guys know? A lot of people say McDonald's. Nope. A lot of people say Starbucks. Nope. Nope. I bet you could, Brett, you know it. Subway. Subway is the #1 fast food restaurant. Okay, now let's talk about why. What is the Sunway with a B? Chloe, I'm with you. What is the first question they ask you when you walk in? What kind of bread do you want? Like the menu for Subway is the same. I just was in Amsterdam. The menu is the same there as it is in Alberta. Like, it's the same Sunway. I mean, can you imagine? They do have sun chips there, Leyton. It's the same. The menu is the same. It's a standard menu, but it's responsive to the people who are ordering it. They ask you for the bread, then they ask you what you want on the sandwich, and then they ask you if you want sauce or salt and pepper, and then they ask you, so I mean, like, all of those questions are scaffolded, and then the choices that they give you, like what kind of bread, what kind of toppings, that's where the differentiation fits. And so it's a combination of scaffolding and differentiation that allows every Subway sandwich to be individually created to meet the needs of individuals, but without having individual menus for every person. And so it's kind of like, how do we take our curriculum that is standard, not standardized, standards based and make it responsive to the students who are actually building their sandwich and understanding there's a concept here. The concept of a sandwich, right, is bread with one topping. You don't even have to have two pieces of bread. I mean, in Denmark, they only do one. So like the concept is you need at least bread with one topping. That's essential, but it's not, but some people want more than that. Some people want two pieces. Some people want pickles. I mean, I don't know who, but so it's so like everyone who walks into a Subway has all of the, everyone has access to all the options. So look at this. They have, oh my goodness, in Victoria, they have a pizza version of Subway. Like what? That's brilliant. That's brilliant, right? But again, you walk in, what's the scaffold? What's the differentiation? This is very different. Do you remember like the bread affair? Yeah, you probably don't because they all went out of business because they would have pre-made sandwiches and you'd have to pick the tomatoes off, but they were made in the morning and they were imprinted in the bread. Your sandwich is ruined, okay? And so thinking about this idea of a judge ruled that tacos and burritos are sandwiches. And you know what, Cynthia? I don't disagree because if you really want to dig into this, the bread is a holder. Okay, so if you want to talk about the concept of a sandwich, it's a holder with toppings. So I mean, I don't like it, Cynthia, but I get it. I mean, it's really just clarifying that. I love where we're going though. So now let's think about this, okay? So rather than having everyone eats the same sandwich and let's take off toppings, what if, you ready? What if we thought about our curriculum design as being a Subway, okay? What's the standard? What's the goal? I can eat a sandwich. What's the concept, okay? And that's not simple. That's not simple. It's essential. And the difference between that is that everybody needs to understand what's essential, okay? And that's going to be enough for some. That's not an adaptation or a modification. That's the foundation, okay? And we're going to provide opportunities for everyone to add on complexity, just like Subway does, right? But who decides what goes on the sandwich is the customer, okay? We're in charge of designing the salad bar. The customer is in charge of deciding what goes on. We're in charge of designing the curriculum. The students are in charge of designing how far they go and what that actually means and looks like, okay? So this, my friends, is what we're thinking about for continuum. Now, I only put 3 here for a reason, okay? And that's because the original continuum was actually not a continuum. It was called the planning pyramid, and it's not new. It's from the 50s, okay? And it came around during the time of conversations around, remember differentiated instruction, right? There was differentiated instruction and differentiated curriculum, but differentiated curriculum can't be done in a standardized model. So it's coming back because we're now a standards-based model, which allows us this type of flexibility. So the planning pyramid has 3 levels of complexity. It looks at what's the essential concept that's important for everyone to know and learn. How do we add on complexity for most students? And how do we further add on complexity for a few more students? And what this means is those few students are not students with disabilities or who need access support. Those are actually students who need the challenge. Our students who need access support fit into the all. And so what I like about this is it actually talks about a range in terms of it's not separating groups into these compartments. It's where do we start for everybody, but giving opportunities for kids to go as far as they can. The students who actually are going to achieve the greatest challenge are actually the smallest group of learners, not the biggest group of learners, but so often we design and implement connected to that small group. You may also recognize this framework. I don't know, this person that I know has called this the baked potato strategy. Everyone needs the potato. We'll talk about that a different day. Okay, I'm gonna pause and we're gonna do a little check-in, okay? So Leyton also taught me this strategy called waterfall. And I'm gonna say a question to you and you are gonna type in the chat box a response, but don't press send until I say go. Okay, you ready? Here's the question. What is one idea that is useful so far? One idea that's useful so far. Type in the chat box. Don't press send. Wait till I say go. You can do it. I believe in you. And then I'm going to show you an example. One useful idea so far, type in the chat box. Do, 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 do. Okay, you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, you're very good at this. The bread is essential. The bread is essential. Actually, the bread is essential, but it's not enough to be your concept. Yeah? Okay. Start from essential and add on, don't be reductive. Good. Yes, yes. Start with the bread. Start with the bread. Oh, you guys are good. Almost few. Start with the essential concept that's accessible for everyone. Good. We provide the toppings the customer student picks to put on the sandwich. Yes, yes, good. Start from an accessible point, use positive language. You got it. A continuum is not a rubric. Honestly, go to sleep. Just continually saying that to yourself over and over. You got it. Okay, you want to see an example? Okay. So I'm going to show you a real example that, let's see, does the ministry provide the continuums or stands within the curriculum? Okay, this is a really good question, Megan. So the ministry does not provide continuums because they're predicted. Okay. Now, if the ministry were to provide something, what I think would be useful is if they provided what's the essential concept, and then we could work with that. In America, I mean, they don't do a lot of things right, but one thing I do like is that within each of their learning standards, they provide like basically what is the target essential kind of outcome. And so then you can use that in different ways. That can be a like a pass, or that can be a this is where we all need to start. I mean, the sad thing is that often that's used to create an essential course that segregates students. And so, I mean, it's one of those things that it's powerful in its use. I would love to see some sort of common, not standardized, but just like a coherent common, like what are some, not even just one concept, like there's many concepts, but like a way that we could kind of have a resource that has concepts connected to learning standards, and then we could move from there in terms of how do we bring challenge to that and how do we create access to that. I think that would be a really great resource for sure. But again, sometimes it's hard to produce resources from the ministry because the ministry can't actually tell us what to do or how to teach. But then it puts us in a tricky position because then often we lack resources, right? So I'll show you some resources today, Megan, that might help you out there. But it's a great question. It's a great question. The other thing, though, is that there's also a lot of value in kind of coming together in your team and being like, what do we think the concept is, right? And that's kind of where I appreciate the flexibility of BC, is we can look at a learning standard and then like locally say, how is this meaningful to us, right? Like, how is this meaningful to our place and our community and our kids? And I think that's often kind of where we don't want to make this more standardized, but I think it's the balance between what are the resources, but how do we also not lose the responsivity within that? Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Let me show you a non-example. Okay. And I see these a lot. So this is a Humanities 9 example. So this, if you are in the world of humanities, there's a content goal that says, and it says like students will know perspective. Okay. And so one strategy that I like to use, that's a universal design for learning strategy, is to, help translate learning goals or standards into language that students understand. And you can do this with students, absolutely. And so if it's a content goal, starting with I know different perspectives on past or present people, places, issues, or events, and compare the values, worldviews, and beliefs of human cultures and societies in different times and places. So there's a lot of information there, okay? And so that comes from elaborations, and it comes from, just unpacking what that standard means. What often has happened is when I see continuums, okay, often it'll take this really complex description and put it in a continuum that is kind of based on words like words based in frequency, like I sometimes know this, or I know part of this, or I consistently know this. And the tricky thing about words that that rely on frequency is that frequency is a measure for fluency. It's not a measure for understanding. So this also really connects to gifted literature, which says we can't just give more of the same and students can't just produce more of the same. Continuums actually have to reflect an increase in complexity. And so how that often has come out that I've seen in BC is then we bring these words in: developing, proficient, sophisticated, but they're so vague and they're so subjective. The other thing is that by having a column that's called proficient, we've just made this standardized. Like the whole point of a continuum is that it's a continuum of proficiency. So I'm going to show you an alternative word that could help kind of clarify this a little bit. But probably the biggest, trickiest part about the continuums in BC that I've seen is that approaching has been removed. Approaching is the access point for students who have intellectual disabilities or gaps in learning or all of the many reasons why students need an access point, right? And so without that approaching, and I mean, like that whole zone of proximal development that we've mentioned, if you walk into a Subway and they don't have any gluten-free options, you're gluten, you need that support, you're not going to go further in the line. And so part of a continuum is to make sure that the entry point is actually accessible for everyone. And if we don't include it approaching, we've removed it. So I'm going to show you an alternative. The other thing that I see that's tricky is that I'll see this little word here with support. Now I know that that means a person. Now, two things. A support is not a person. A support is a tool that increases independence, okay? A person is a resource. And so it's really important to clarify that. Now, if a person needs a tool to meet a goal, that's not an emerging thing. You can use a tool to meet a goal in any one of these levels of complexity. That's like saying, I need to use a fork and a knife to eat my sandwich. Like that shouldn't affect the evaluation. So if that's a tool, take it off. If it is a person, the problem isn't the person. The problem is that the access point isn't accessible enough. And so if you see with support anywhere on a continuum, it's one of two things. You need a more accessible starting point, or we need to understand that tools don't affect evaluation. Or put with support, it doesn't matter if you need support. Like it's a completely separate process. And so what's an alternative? Can I show you? And so basically looking at the continuum for today, right? Taking this idea of this 3-level scaffold and now bringing it to today's conversation of continuum, the difference between this and the continuum of today is that now we're not just considering grade level, we're considering the edges too, because like you don't need me to tell you that there's going to be kids who are outside of the grade level, either in approaching or extending. And so a true learning continuum has 5 points. It has 3 to represent the planning pyramid or the grade level scaffold, and then it stretches it for the edges for students who need access or students who need challenge. And so then what this looks like as a continuum is for each learning standard, we can actually say, okay, our approaching is a way to create access for students. It's not enough to pass. It's not enough to show that you're achieving grade level, but it is a stepping point and a scaffold for so many kids. And if you do have a student with an intellectual disability, this can become their access goal or their replacement goal on their IEP, okay? This often becomes prior knowledge. This is really intentional planning so that everyone starts with success. The emerging is grade level essential concept. What's essential for a student to be okay moving forward if that's the only evidence they show, but also providing options to add on more complexity over time. Extending can either go deeper within the continuum or go beyond the continuum. That again is where that prediction comes from based on your learners. So what could this look like? Here's an example of a humanities continuum. Okay, so we're looking at this idea of perspective and creating a predicted sequence that increases in complexity over time. I like to start with essential, right? Because that's the concept, that's the most important. So like I know different perspectives. Adding on complexity, I know how perspectives change. Adding on complexity, I know how they impact values. adding on complexity. I know how cultures can influence perspective. So it's kind of that switch in perspective. Now I'm going to think about my learners and say, okay, who is the student who needs the most support and how do we make this accessible for them? A really great way to create access is to make goals connect to an individual person, right? So I know perspectives of an event that happens in my life, in my community that I know really well. This is going to now be a really great access point for everyone. No one will be harmed by that, okay? Now, the other thing that I know is tricky is that we're not on a 5-point continuum. If it were up to me, we would, but it's not. So if we're going to move to a 4-point continuum, instead of taking off the approaching, I think we need to take off the developing or whatever the middle one is. And so rather than having only grade level, we're going to have an approaching, which is the access point, 2 levels of grade level, and then an extending. And so thinking about this for Humanities 9, we've merged developing and essential together because that's the most important concept. And then 2 levels of complexity with an access point, and my time is up. So the last thing I'm going to show you is one of my favorite new strategies in connecting this with UDL is once we have these continuums, is helping students to know, okay, how do I know that I know this, right? How do I know that I know different points of view? What are the activities? What are the activities in the teacher's guides, in all of the resources that we get? What are the actually activities that we're doing with kids and helping them to know why these activities are important and how do we connect them to these goals? This is where you really start to see UDL shine. I'll have a slide in here that's probably a can of worms, but then because a question I know some people are thinking are, well, how does this connect to the reporting order? It can absolutely still reflect the reporting order, but just being really, really clear and understanding that we cannot eliminate approaching from a continuum and that proficiency is all of them. A better word that I like is confident, because if we make one column proficiency, we've just made this standardized, which is the total opposite of the point of a continuum. Friends, I have a new website. If you want to see more examples of this and have templates to play around, I have a new website, drshelleymore.com, and there is a whole resource section connected to kind of these big ideas. And if you click on inclusive curriculum design, there are templates for learning continuums. For backwards design, there's examples for BC and examples all over the world. What can you do in 20 minutes, right? Friends, thank you. I have some questions for you to kind of think about as we transition over. How is this connecting to what you're already doing? What are you thinking about? How is this extending your thinking, and what could you pull into your practice? Thank you, friends. Leyton, take it away.
Thank you, Shelley. We're so grateful to have you in your 25-minute presentation, which was rich in goodness, and we probably couldn't have done it in a second less. I'm so excited to transition over to Belinda Chi. Belinda, we're so thrilled that you came back to present again this year. So folks, I'm delighted to introduce to you our wonderful colleague, Belinda Chi, who teaches in Burnaby School District.
Hi, everyone. Shelley, your presentation was so amazing. I wrote down so many things. And you also inspired me to change or add some things to my slide. So thank you for that also. Okay, we're going to get started. So I'm going to talk about UDL and the learning environment and writer's workshop. I work in the Burnaby School District, but as Leyton mentioned, I'm currently on mat leave with a little 5-month-old. And so here I am, but it's really nice to be back and do this. So thank you for inviting me, Leyton and Tammy. Okay, so I added some family pictures because I did not have family pictures in this slide. I just had me. And then I saw MJ's and I saw Shelley's, and I was like, oh, I got to throw in some family pics. So here we go. So thank you for that reminder. A little bit about me, and here are the things that are important to me. I'm also doing my PhD work with Leyton, and but that's also currently on hold, everyone. So there's my family. That's me as a baby. And then this is Ellie. Do you see some similarities? Maybe just a little bit. And that is my husband, Nate. And yeah. Okay. Those are my cats who I feel like I've maybe neglected a little bit since the arrival of Ellie, but I love them dearly. And they're starting to love her too. Okay. So, okay, we're going to move on. I'm going to talk about an example of creating a classroom environment when you know like kind of who your kids might be. So there was usually I teach grade 4 or 5 in elementary school, and there was one year where I knew I was getting a student in a motorized wheelchair. So I knew that in June, and so kind of at the end of the year, my administrator worked with me to think about how we could create a classroom environment or learning environment that was really welcoming for the student. So shifted some things around, took out some pieces of furniture that we didn't need, and just also made things accessible at his level. And so when you know who your students are, those are some things you can kind of think about ahead of time. And then once you get your students, what you can do is think about how you want your classroom community to be. So what can you do to co-create this classroom community with your students? And then how does this connect to UDL? So you may have seen this before from CAST. It's the learning guidelines for UDL. And I'm just going to focus on kind of the big umbrella pieces. So engagement, representation, action, and expression. And what does that look like when we're building a learning environment with students? So these are some things you can do. So with the engagement piece, think about and ask students what spaces are important to them. So maybe a calm down corner, a library, maybe alternative spaces to work for them. Co-create perhaps a classroom contract or an agreement. This allows students' voices to be heard and think about, what is important to them. When I think about kind of just the two things I mentioned, when I was in grade 4, I remember being in row seating, and I was always like in that first row. I think I was the 4th seat, and it was like that the whole year, and I hated it. And it sucked. We never talked to anybody. There wasn't a lot of group work encouraged. And so, that really kind of sets the tone for what what is accessible for kids and how your classroom culture is, right? And even this idea of the classroom contract, I remember walking into classrooms where, you just have that the posters of like respectful or responsible, and it's already up, but kids can generate that, right? And when you involve students to be part of that conversation, it's so much more meaningful. And once that agreement is up, I also encourage people to continuously refer to it, and also encourage kids to use it, because it's a nice reminder for kids to not just regulate themselves, but co-regulate each other when they're like, hey, is that being responsible? Like if that's one of your things, and it's great. It works really well. And I really like that. So make sure you don't just have it on your wall at the beginning of the year and then kind of forget about it, but to always bring it in your daily practice. And then think about, what do the folks in the community value? With the representation piece, a fun thing you could do with loose parts is get students to create their dream classroom. And then this also allows your classroom to kind of change throughout the year. So maybe each term you do something different, or maybe there's a certain space that you change up. So it doesn't always have to be the same throughout the year. And again, this allows students to be a part of creating that classroom culture. Maybe have them work in groups to discuss what's important to them. Do a gallery tour of ideas. I know that I used to call it gallery walk, but then in thinking about accessibility, I've changed it to gallery tour of ideas. So I thought, just thinking about how can we be more inclusive to the folks in our community. Even if that's your takeaway today, then like, great, use it. And think about what kinds of stories and examples you might share with students when building classroom environment, because you as the teacher can really set the tone, and students love learning about you. And when you make it personal and when they can connect to you, that can make such a huge difference. And then what are various ways you might present information to students? So is it always this one way? I always think about like, math and how I learned math in school and how it was just the teacher standing at the board showing the example. And it was like, if you didn't know how to do it that one way, it was over. It was definitely over for me. I was not strong in math. So I needed multiple ways for a problem to be shown to me and to be solved. And so I would love for people to think about that, even when they're thinking about representation in how they present information to students, whether that is part of creating your classroom environment, or if you're thinking about other teaching other subjects. And then the action expression piece is inviting students to share their thoughts and personal narratives. I love when students share stories about who they are. I think that's really how you build classroom community. And so how might they be sharing about their thinking and about the classroom environment? And then how might they share their stories? Might you do it through sharing circle or video or pictures, graphics? Will they create a book? Again, those are all those other pieces of UDL that we can bring in. It doesn't always have to be posing a question then having a student answer orally. It can look so different if you open things up for them. Okay, so rather than giving you a checklist, I've kind of created this list of questions you might ask yourself. You and your team, whoever is in your room, might work together to think about, so who are your students? What are their needs, wants? How might you and your community accommodate them? What kinds of spaces do you want to create in your learning environment? Is there a library? Is there a reading nook, an SEL area? I'm sure there's lots of other fun spaces you can think about. What kinds of spaces might students need? What do you imagine when you teach students as a whole group? And then what kinds of small group meeting spaces could there be? And where will they work when they work individually? I was in my friend's classroom last year and she had these little dinner trays. They're just like kind of lap dinner trays that she bought from Dollarama, and she just had like 6 of them. But kids loved just taking them to her small carpet area, and then that was just like a different space for them to work. Or I was in another classroom there where they had these milk crates, and the teacher just had like 4 milk crates, and she made them like little little cushions so that when you flip them over, you could sit on them as a little chair. There's just so many different creative ways, or even little like carpet squares. If you have those things in the class, it just kind of gives kids options for where they want to sit, how they want to work. And we know like classrooms aren't very big, but those things you can kind of, I think, don't take a lot of space, and you can always put it away when you're not using those things. Okay, we're going to quickly talk about Writer's Workshop. So creating and maintaining a space for young authors to shine. I'm going to talk about just 3 points, or highlight 3 main points in Writer's Workshop. You might have seen this book before, The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom by Felicia Rose Chavez. So just to kind of point out some of the points here in this little blurb of hers from the book, it says the Anti-Racist Workshop is a study in love. It advances humility and empathy over control and domination, freeing educators to deconstruct bias to achieve a cultural shift in perspective, design democratic learning spaces for creative concentration, recruit, nourish, and fortify students of color to best empower them to exercise voice, and embolden every student to self-advocate as a responsible citizen in a globalized community. So here's a little overview of Writer's Workshop, which I'm sure many of you may be familiar with. And if not, I'm sure if you're in Leyton's class, he's going to talk about it. And here's a little flow of Writer's Workshop, how that could look like, but we're going to skip through it. Okay, so with mini lessons, Something I wanted to highlight is when you start Writers Workshop, I encourage everyone to talk about what does writing mean to the students in your community and define this together. So I was team teaching with a colleague in a 6-7 class, and we just this is their classroom, and we just brainstormed with the kids. So like what kind of writing do you want to see, and what do you want to be free to create during this time? And they came up with all these different things. So there's like reviews of songs or clothes, movies. They have create games, cooking recipes. Someone said dating sim. I was like, I'm not sure what that means, kids, but okay, I'm gonna write that idea up. I want to honor your voice. But I didn't really explore that further with the kiddos in 6-7. Some kids suggested fan fiction or sports highlights, diary. There's so many different things, and lyrics. So a piece about lyrics was there was a student in the class who was an English language learner who had just come from Russia, maybe a couple of years ago. And he was still, getting to know the language, but something he loved, he was listening to Eminem. So he was like showing me all these Eminem lyrics, and he was like, I love Eminem so much. And telling me like which songs were his favorite. And I was like, okay, but not the explicit version because we're in school right now. And and anyway, but that was kind of that access point for that student who didn't know a lot of English to start writing. That excited him, I think, because sometimes with other assignments it's very overwhelming when you don't have a grasp of the language, but it tapped into this passion that he had already. And so looking at Eminem's lyrics, he was kind of able to create his own lyrics. So that was really cool, I thought. And then the other cool thing was creating games. There were 3 students who worked together to write this whole story about a game. And I thought that was really cool to see collaboration amongst kids. Like, it doesn't have to be something you're doing on your own. This was something that they were excited about. They were discussing the characters and the setting and what was the storyline of the game. So I thought that was super cool. Something else you might want to think about is what anchor text you're bringing in. So are the texts that you're selecting and the voices that are being shared with students, are they diverse, and do they represent your students? And are they only in one language? Because again, thinking about your English language learners, allow them to bring in what they're reading in their language. There's so much technology out there where you can use Google Translate to share what they're bringing in, and those stories in other languages can be shared. So I encourage that. Okay, author's circle. How do you gather when students share their work? I love this image of the different chairs. I think it was kind of representative of all the different voices that are in our classrooms and of the kids we work with. Something I'd like you to think about is, are there certain voices that are louder or more frequent than others? And if so, how do we illuminate other voices in the class? And with the sharing circle, does it always have to be a big circle, or maybe can there be smaller circles where kids are sharing together? So that's something to think about as well. And then how does the community support one another as writers? Because when we do this throughout the year, we need to think about how do we maintain the space, because at the beginning when we start, it can be very exciting and people are energized. But as we go throughout the year, what are some little changes and little tweaks we can change or shift or take a risk in to keep it exciting and also to keep it very supportive of our young writers? Okay, the last thing I wanted to highlight here was this book by Caitlin R. Tucker and Katie Novak, Shift Writing into the Classroom with UDL and Blended Learning. And they talk about shifting to student-led learning. So again, this fits into Writer's Workshop when we look at that editing and revision stage. where students can work with one another. So they kind of have these 4 points of using student-generated review, self-assessment or peer assessment as well, student-led discussion, and then student-initiated project-based learning. Okay,
Belinda,
yes,
why don't you sneak us back to your framework for writers workshop?
okay, here,
Whichever one of those two that you wanted to share. Yeah,
yeah, this one.
sure.
Okay. I
Why
was
don't you
like,
skip-
do you want to talk
give-
about it? I
give
feel
it
like
to us. Give it to us, sister.
no, these are just some different, I guess, yes, the framework of writers workshop. So we would do a mini lesson, and then you'd allow students to do some independent writing. There's conferencing and coaching that can happen between you and students. It can also it can be also peer-to-peer, but you would of course have to teach your kids how to do that with one another. You might have some supportive Blackline masters to kind of help students through this piece of reading and revising each other's work. And then there's the authors circle for sharing out. Of course, there's formative assessment that happens throughout these pieces. And then there's summative assessment, ideally, but not limited to published pieces. Because some kids, they might not get to publishing a piece, and that's okay. Just ask them, what's the piece that they want us to assess for that summative assessment, and give them that choice. Okay.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Belinda. I just know you probably felt a little pressure with time, and I thought that's okay. Let's go back and just talk about the framework. But the mini lessons in the independent writing, in the author circle, and then the conferencing during the independent writing, these are just beautiful things that I know you're so committed to.
Thank you. Okay. And my question for you is, what's one question or idea that you might explore in your practice with yourself or your students? Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Belinda. So we're just going to pass the torch to my great friend, MJ Medenwaldt, who I've had a chance to collaborate with, work with over for a couple of decades now. Hey, MJ. And I know you'll introduce yourself, and I think you're teaching grade 6-7 this year.
I am.
Yeah.
Okay, here I am. I'm still on unceded Musqueam territory. Actually, I will say Ahaichka, OCM. That is in the Hunkaminam for thank you, everyone, for being here today. And thank you for everyone for inviting me to join this incredible dialogue. Here we are. There's my mom. There's my mom's incredible hair and my dad. Like I said, that's me a little while ago, 1965, and I was 1. On the right, as Leyton often refers to our froligs, the people up in the top there, those are my froligs right now. I work with James, Ian, and Jillian in the space. I can hear them behind me. They're screaming and yelling and laughing, so I'm not quite sure what's happening there. My other good friends, Lynn and Hugh, who constantly push me to really think deeply about myself, my own experience, and how that informs what I do with kids. And that's me with my 2 little boys who are very little and are now 22 and 20. Those are the books that are sitting kind of beside my bed. There's one there from Faye Brownlee that I have every single copy of over the last 20 years. Interesting. There's Katie Novak as well. And then the 2 on the bottom, Andra Tesha Fitzgerald is my new hero. So just kind of what's informing some of the work I've been doing in the last couple years. I teach at Brick House Elementary. We are the biggest school in Richmond City Centre. With staff, there's probably 800 of us. We're right by the hospital on number 3 in Gilbert. And as you can see, we're an urban school. We went for a walk today. That's from today. There's so much development in the city centre. Almost all our kids live in apartments. They're urban kids. And we have a huge disparity in income levels. With 800 kids, you kind of get that. I would say I'm one of the only people that only speaks English in my building. So just remembering where we are in terms of place, I think a lot of people land here in Richmond first before they move to other places. So I like to believe that when we receive them, they're beginning that negotiation of their new identities as they begin speaking English, as they find out who they are on this land where we all end up together. In terms of how I position myself in my work, it comes from Andrew Tesha, that really for me, it's as simple as this. It's honoring children. And as a teacher, I have the power to honor children every day. So as a mom, I think that's probably informed me the most and connected with me, because Andrea Tesha talks, when she speaks in her book about kids, she calls them our babies. So when I see a 12-year-old, that is someone's baby. So that's the beauty of working in an elementary school. When you see those little ones come in kindergarten, those are people's precious babies. And so our work is to honor those children. No one comes empty-handed. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is valuable. You will teach, share, and grow as you learn. It's reciprocal. And they are very important to me. And their movement forward is really important to me. That is like that little acorn in there. That's the seed and the power we hold every time a child enters our room. This is my room. I love it. Belinda's the same thing. I have flexible furniture in my room. I think I start every morning in a circle, which means all of my furniture is on wheels. It gets wheeled in and out. 3 things: campfire, cave, and watering hole. Those are the 3 sort of structures that I group kids in throughout the day. And it's always in response to what's happening and how the kids need to interact or how they need to be working. You can see again, high and low areas. Those 2 girls in the corner, they're in the quiet area, or as the kids call it, the cozy corner. It's available to everyone, not just certain kids. It's probably one of the most popular spaces in my whole classroom. One thing I put is, we honor all kids by acknowledging that everyone needs access to individual, small group, and small group supports, and that kids need choices and the opportunity to practice making decisions about where and how their learning will happen. What I love best about my space is that the adults can come up alongside kids. So you can just kind of move around and the kids say, I need help a lot. And it's so great because an adult can find me very easily. It's not someone saying who needs help, because, no one puts their hand up, right? We can move really easily through this space. And as Faye says, we can get right in kids' faces because that's the best way to find out what's happening with them. So starting, my goal is to share with you about lit circles. Sorry, book clubs, I call them book clubs, but I realized there was some steps in between. So I'm just going to show you a sweep of, like, say, 2 terms. So 6 months in my classroom through a literacy lens. Number 1, this was just September. Who are our learners? We do performance-based reading assessments. We call them reading conversations. The adults read with every single child. We got to find out what their decoding level is. I have lots of kids who are beginning language speakers who are just arriving in Canada. We need to know what they're able to read. So as I'm thinking forward and planning for them, what kinds of texts they will need to access. What are our options for them for accessibility? There's also an oral piece so that we are asking them questions and getting a sense of what they understand in terms of their receptive language. The other piece is, how do they feel about reading? I love this. So out of my 1 class of 30, I think I have 1 child who really loves reading. The most of them don't very much. Something happens by the time they get to be 11 and 12 where you can kind of see not their favorite thing. And that creates a huge barrier for us at school. Because, you know, we don't want to force people to do things and we're trying to invite them in. One of the biggest barriers in the last 5 years for me has been student engagement. So again, how do they feel? And what can I do with that information? What do they need? From asking the kids, they need a really good fit and a sweet spot. One thing talking to kids, if the challenge is really low and the engagement is really low, the energy in the room dies, and everything feels very, very passive. You get kids saying, I finished this, and the other day someone said they finished something and they were playing cards in the corner. I have no idea what that was about. I hear the word bored a lot, which I find really interesting. And I also see frustrated. I see kids, when they first arrive, I see them leaving for the bathroom every 15 minutes. I see them going like this with rulers on pencils. That I would read as frustration. So really what we're trying to get is high engagement and a high level of challenge where they are, because that's the sweet spot. What matters to the kids? What really matters to the kids are themselves and their connections to other kids. This is something from what Belinda was saying, sort of brainstorming about what we want our classroom agreements to be. Who do we want to be when we are in this space, and how do we want to feel? The kids, they so know they want safety and belonging, and they want acceptance of all people. So that, in terms of community and building our reading identities, those things are all connected together. So when I'm thinking about what the kids need and what they're looking for, I come back to this. So how are books, specifically vehicles, towards ourselves and to each other? Some of you have probably seen this before, but it's the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors that books can allow us to see ourselves, our windows into other people's lives. And I interpret the sliding glass door is books move us. They transform us to want to push the door open and move forward towards each other or towards something that we become very passionate about. And the reason I put the book Obasan there is because when I was in first year university in 1984, Joy Kagawa came to read the book because she had, I think, just written it. And I remember very distinctly listening to her and starting to cry in a lecture hall with like 300 people. And it makes me emotional even today, because it was the first time I had ever heard anyone read, like, first time I had ever experienced characters that looked like my family, that spoke of the experiences that had been pretty much silenced by dominant society, but was what my family talked about all the time. And the power of a text to erase you is huge. And the power of a text to actually say, yes, you're here and you matter, is huge. So that's the one I put up, because that was my aha moment that, oh my gosh, like, I'm a real person because they're writing about me and my family in a book. And my little is, it's not, 2024. And what books are we still putting in front of kids, and which books are not being put in front of kids? So with that in mind, these are 2 questions my team and I have been grappling with the last couple of years. What are our pedagogical moves? What can we try to center all of our students in the learning? I am a curriculum wonk. I love curriculum. I did a little bit of work on the BC curriculum in ELA, so I'm just let's say I'm a little bit of a wonk. How can we design and scaffold a variety of literacy experiences that create opportunities for engagement, connection, and community? If you get those 3 things going, the kids are going to make gains in their literacy development. So starting off, like in terms of access points, mentor texts, always use them. Picture books, they're also called. You can see there are so many beautiful, beautiful, beautiful books. And then match it with a strategy. This strategy I've used for 25 years, still use it. It's called Listen, Sketch, and Draft. It's in Faye Brownlee's very first book from like 1980 or something. And you can see this is what happens. The kids read, they view the text. I project it nice and big. The text is chunked. They draw in little boxes as we go along. Then they can add thinking bubbles, speaking bubbles, and words. I have never, ever had a child, even children and like all children, we have managed, in the kids who need a little more scaffolds, we have managed to have every child be able to use this one strategy. It's incredibly powerful. So once you get that going, come back in your big group and off of your notes, the visual note taking, that's what that is, the kids have been doing, then you work that community, right? What are the words that are starting to surface? I really, really like working in single words. As you can see, you can start to translanguage. We can start to look at the other words we know in other languages and explore them more deeply. And as Shelley was saying about concepts, these are your conceptual words. You're going to get huge mileage out of them over the course of the next, couple months. Then circle back, go back, maybe even to the same story. Go back to a story with a similar theme and connect and go deeper using different strategies. Process, right? And then, so some of the examples you can see, that's another Listen, Sketch, and Draft. You can see some visible thinking strategies. The See, Think, Wonder, again, is visual. And then you can see the kids working with each other to talk through what they've drawn, what they're noticing. You can see them in a small group. And then at the very bottom corner, that's one of my favorite things. Those are it's a cooperative learning strategy called Inside Outside Circles. They have their notes in hand and they're sharing with different partners as they rotate around the things that they are noticing or the ideas that they're coming up with about the text. This is my respond slide. So one thing I notice is if we push kids really fast to write written responses about things, you don't get a lot of writing. And I do believe, that all kids can learn how to write and that writing is important. Could be single words. It can be a label. That's writing. The top right corner is so I use ePortfolios, which we can use video recordings. So that's another way that the kids communicate. There's another picture there of a tableau. So we're again showing something with our bodies and with people describing what's happening. And the thing on the left, those are loose parts, or materials, which I use a lot. That student was not yet ready to write. So they were creating their response using materials. You can see on the bottom, the written responses can be a month of working on an index card, or it can be a double-sided journal entry, which is kind of the bread and butter of reading response. So that was like building, all the different skills so that we can move into book clubs, because I really, really love doing book clubs. So they have to be, and that's what I learned, they have to be scaffolded. So book clubs, the kids choose a book. There's a big selection of books. You do some discussion prep, then the kids meet in book clubs like, adults do. And then afterwards they do a little bit of reflection. The types of book clubs I do, I have lots of titles. You can read one book for 2 months. You can read 2, you can read all of them. As you read through the books, you can join whatever book club you want. So they get really good at not giving away what happens in it. The one thing I noticed about my book club selections, 2023 to 2024 were completely different. And I realized that's because my class was completely different. And when I think about representation, when I started going out looking for books, I had those children in mind who I was thinking about. I had a student who had just come from Nigeria, and the probability of everything had a Nigerian main character. Oh, it went dark. Really important for her, and she loved the book. Again, right? Because you're just trying to see the kids so they can see themselves, and suddenly they can talk a lot about what happens in a book. One of the other major barriers we had was that the kids did not have a lot of experience when the teacher wasn't watching them. So their choices and their independence, they didn't have a lot of experience in those areas. For example, being actually tracking time and knowing how long 10 minutes was. So we explored this idea of workflows to have some kids, they could do certain things for 10-minute chunks. Other kids, maybe they do 3 10-minute chunks of reading on my own. We really had to work really hard on coaching them and practicing them so that they could be doing something independently and the adults could be freed up to sit in the actual book clubs. Okay. So what types of things were they doing while the adults were in the book clubs with the kids? Double-sided journal entries up there, some preparation for the book club itself, reading. Those were some people you can see, and that's them reading. They like to read in the cozy corner, all squished up next to each other. Some loose parts, because that we had done some work with that in the first term. And they were just doing it independently. And I love the one on the left. You can see someone again using their first language to go back and retell one of the picture books we'd been working with. Okay, book clubs. Oh, my book club slide seems to have disappeared. Well, okay, so here we go. Going into book clubs. So book clubs, you get the kids meet together. What are they doing? They are talking about what the connections and some of the ideas that they're getting as they're reading the books. We did introduce them to the last word strategy, which is an oral language strategy, so that they could have the agency to run the conversation without the adults controlling it. One of the barriers we had for book clubs is the kids kept looking to the adults to run the book clubs. So we figured out pretty quickly, and they figured out pretty quickly, that we weren't going to say anything, because this is what the adults were doing. They were sitting fly on the wall in a chair, listening. My favorite thing is kid watching and kid listening. So you can see I've got just sort of checklists of watching what the kids are doing. And I'm actually copying verbatim the things that kids are saying. And for me, that is evidence that I can use for assessment. And then over in the corner, I have, well, what am I noticing? Things that they might need some work with. I'm taking notes of those things so I can plan some mini lessons with the whole class. Because you know what, if these people need that, the other kids in the class will need it too. And then we can do that strategically, not interrupting their conversation flow, but later, right? When we all need to go and learn some of these other things and build our skill set. This is what happened after. So as the kids were cycling in book clubs, and book clubs were about 15 minutes, you have to remember, right? Some kids are working independently on things, and some kids, as they're cycling out of the book clubs, we realized that, they could continue to go, they wanted to keep going back into the books. So one thing we offered was a Padlet where they could go and continue a conversation online and add some more stuff. There's a little bit of reflection happening, because now you've just had like a conversation with a bunch of people and you've picked up some new ideas. Before you lose those, like just jot them down on that piece of paper. And again, was there a new quote now that's sticking in your head that you want to pull onto your paper to do a journal entry about? In the right corner, I use a lot of checklists to help the kids self-reflect on about how things go. And so at the end of that sort of work block, you know, what was something that you were able to do well? Always strength-based, relentlessly strength-based people, right? Never, what didn't I do? Always, what was I able to do? If I'd known, I would have brought my continua, but I was thinking assessment. So, I realize every year I just think I want to do a big project, like, oh, we'll do something about characters in the books, and we never get there. So, I had to think about, okay, if it's very process-based, then how do I find the evidence, and make that evidence visible to the kids that they're learning things? So this is kind of a one pager that I did with the kids at the last cycle of the book clubs. And it's this idea that they take their portfolio of stuff and they mine it, right, for evidence that they can do all these different things. I do have a continua that I use as well for the proficiency scales. But again, when I'm working with the kids, especially kids who don't feel very engaged or good about themselves, strength-based, strength-based, strength-based. So what are all the great things you're able to do? And so this is kind of a one page at a glance. And you can also see that we have like the core competencies on the other side because they're all intertwined. Okay. Yep, these are just little snippets from that. So self-assessment, really important all throughout. Core competencies, always woven in. It's just like a bigger foundational piece. And then I love that actually on the right, that they're going in and they're looking for the evidence of their thinking, which is essentially, it answers the learning standard, right? So what Shelley was saying is very, very true. What my colleagues and I do is we will take the samples, for example, if the kids have done 2 listen, sketch, and drafts, we take them together, we group them, and we start to look for the indicators of where the proficiency starts to change. More so because then we have to be able to respond to actually help the kids and make those things explicit so they know what they need to do to move their learning along, right? Okay, last story. This happened yesterday. So these kids were the ones who said they don't like reading from the very first frame at the top. And my Jillian was in class with me and she said, "What are they doing over there?" And I looked over and the one student sitting he said, "Can I sit in the grandma chair?" Sure, it's a rocking chair. He had they'd just been to the library and he had a cookbook. And he was like doing the teacher thing where he was reading it upside down and showing them the pages and he was reading it to his friends. All this stuff, you know, like I said, I'm a curriculum wonk. I want to do all these things, but really it's super, super simple. I want kids to love reading, to see it as something that can sustain them throughout their lives as a source of joy and also as connection and community with others. So I really love that. And they're sitting in the cozy corner. It doesn't get better than that. And finally, my last frame is I was in Australia and I went to the best bookstore ever. There's 2 of them, I think, or 3 maybe in the world. And this is my piece, is around diverse books. And my question for everyone is, you know, at school, what are the books we could let go of? And what are the books that you really want to put into kids' hands? And that's it.
Thanks, MJ. People, I don't know how we did it, but we ended on time. Shelley, thank you for sharing your practice around inclusion and getting us thinking about continuums. Belinda, thanks for helping us think about the process and writing in inclusive spaces and how we're building space for kids to be doing the work they want to be doing and telling the stories they want to tell. And MJ, thanks for bringing it home, thinking again about space, engagement, co-creating with kids, and also fostering this love of literacy and engaging them, our students, our middle years students, with texts that they can relate to, so they can see themselves in the world. Friends, thank you for coming to our really fun launch of the webinar series this year. Our next session, Tammy is going to share the date any minute now.
December 3rd, Brad Baker, Leona Prince, Katie Marin, and Sarah Alston Hogan from Parksville District joining Brad and Leona.
Great. See y'all soon. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, MJ. Thank you, Belinda. Thank you, Shelley. And thank you everyone for coming and engaging and taking something away for your practice.